Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, just 2 months ago, this committee enacted a major surface transportation bill that made significant improvements to our highway transit and rail system. That bill was developed in a bipartisan manner and passed overwhelmingly. Unfortunately, this FAA bill represents a departure from the bipartisan tradition of this committee that has been successful under Chairman Schuster's leadership.
And will set. Would you yield for just a second?
Yes.
I would object to that. We've done much of this bill is done on a very bipartisan basis.
Reclaiming
my fundamental difference on policy, but
reclaiming my time. Much of the bill has, but everything is overshadowed by privatization of the air traffic control system, and will set back our efforts to modernize our aviation system and ensure the safety of the flying public. This air traffic control privatization scheme is an extreme and risky venture that will hand over our control of our airspace, in effect, to the major airlines. One of the stated motivations is that we need to speed up modernizing our airspace and the installation of next-gen technology. But progress is finally being made on that front. Completely disrupting the ATC system and splitting up the FAA will probably set back next-gen implementation by quite a few years. So modernization cannot be the real motivation. The other stated reason some support this plan is to preclude furloughs and delays caused by budget cuts and possible government shutdowns. There is, of course, a much safer and simpler solution: just don't shut down the government. Nor should we risk the safety of the flying public because a few members of Congress and senators, arguably one senator who's just leaving New Hampshire, want to impose drastic budget cuts or hold the budget hostage in an attempt to enact an extreme agenda. And even if this plan were to go through, the rest of the FAA, including safety inspectors, would still be vulnerable to sequestrations and shutdowns. And how can citizens talk to or influence or effectively pressure this corporation? And I know they can be heard, but they'll be ignored with respect to noise or other problems. Mr. DeFazio and Mr. Larson have offered reasonable solutions to address any legitimate concerns that have been raised with respect to airspace modernization and budget uncertainty, but so far their suggestions have been rejected, which leaves us the only real reason, a simple ideological devotion to privatizing everything and eliminating as much government as possible. If air traffic control isn't an inherently government function, what is? Proponents of the bill would give away billions of dollars in taxpayer-funded assets to the airlines. The FAA, and thus federal taxpayers, have invested at least $53 billion over the past 20 years in capital investments in these assets. Some of the same members who complain about the deficit and rail against federal spending are perfectly willing to give away $53 billion to government property to private companies as a gift. That's more than we spent on the entire NIH budget last year. That's more than we spent last year on the TSA, VA medical services, clean water and drinking funds, Section 8, HOPA, Orion White, Head Start, energy efficiency, and violence against women combined. We can't provide $600 million for the Flint water crisis, but we can give away $53 billion to the airlines. This bill goes beyond a public policy disagreement. It is a complete special interest giveaway. Supporters of the bill will claim that ATC will be managed by a nonprofit entity. But make no mistake, this so-called nonprofit will be dominated by for-profit airlines. The same companies that nickel and dime passengers for baggage and legroom will be making decisions about routes and taxing the public to manage the airspace. Luckily, there are many groups and members on both sides of the aisle in both chambers who see this plan for what it is, and it is worth commending Delta Airlines for acting responsibly and outlining numerous concerns with this privatization scheme in the very detailed letter referenced by Mr. DeFazio. As Delta points out, the U.S. has over 13,000 airports and about 7,000 aircraft in flight at any one time. U.S. airspace is dense, congested, diverse, and unique. Privatization has never been attempted in airspace of this nature, nor should it be. Performing an unprecedented and uncontrolled experiment on the American flying public will be risky, unsafe, and unfair to the flying public and to taxpayers. Mr. Callio, the UK and Canada have been cited as examples of where privatization has been done before. But they both received payment for ATC facilities and equipment they transferred to the private corporation. If privatization is so important, would the airlines be willing to reimburse the federal taxpayers for the fair market value of the assets being transferred in effect to them?
It's true that there was a reimbursement. It was about $1 billion in the UK, $1.4 billion in Canada. I would point out, Mr. Nadler, that the airlines aren't going to run this new entity. It's going to be variety of...
But they will dominate it effectively.
I don't believe that's true.
All right, we can dispute that, but I ask you a simple question. Would the airlines be willing to reimburse, or would this company reimburse the federal government over time, 53 or whatever the fair market value?
I think it's the beginning of the process, and that could be determined down the line. I think you'd have to look at it.
Would you support that in the legislation?
No. Airline
Okay,
passengers
thank you.
pay for most
Mr.
of the...
Boland,
Yeah.
I'm concerned about how consumers will fare under this proposal. It seems consumers will have no recourse on a system that would be heavily dominated and controlled by the commercial airlines. How would this proposal ensure that the commercial airlines are not able to collude, reduce capacity, and close out competition? What specific safeguards are in place to ensure that this cannot happen?
I think a lot of the protections are supposed to come later. These are things that the board itself, I believe, is supposed to develop. But
supposed to develop, but nothing is guaranteed.
I think that's a legitimate concern.
Thank you. My time has expired.
Thank you.